Okay, so for today, as I talked about on Wednesday, we're going to be covering midpoint and talking more about endpoints. So I know it says it continues 1, 2, but this is going to be called 1.3. But I got to switch between some slides because we're going to be going over midpoint, kind of continuing from last class, and then we're going to be introducing the midpoint formula. So for the midpoint, so this says the midpoint M of AB is the point that bisects or divides the segment into two congruent segments. So if M is the midpoint of AB, then AM equals MB, okay? So if AB equals 6, then AM equals 3, and MB equals 3. So as you're just finishing writing this down, the biggest thing to know is just that midpoint is the middle. So think of mid, it's going to be right in the middle of the whole segment. So again, midpoint is the middle. And we're going to be able to solve it with coordinates in a moment. But if you want to look at a quick example, I just got to flip through some slides. But just again, know that the midpoint is the point that bisects or divides the segment into two congruent segments. Okay, so sorry, I just skipped this for a little bit. And let's look at an example right here. Okay, so here's an example using midpoint. Is this says D is the midpoint of EF, ED equals 4x plus 6, and DF equals 7x minus 9. Okay, we got to find ED, DF, and EF. Okay, well this time it doesn't give us the value of EF. So we got to figure out what can we do and what do we know in order to solve. So if we look at this image right here, okay, so yeah, it shows us that ED equals 4x plus 6. It shows us that DF equals 7x minus 9, okay? And at the very top it says D is the midpoint of EF. So since D is the midpoint, it bisects EF perfectly in half, and it's perfectly in the middle. Therefore, that makes ED congruent to DF. So imagine there's a tick mark right here showing that those two are congruent. So with that being said, in order to solve for x, we can say ED equals DF because they're congruent to each other. Okay, so we can go ahead and substitute our values. So we can put 4x plus 6 equals 7x minus 9. And then you're just going to solve from there. So we're going to go ahead and subtract 4x from both sides. And we're going to simplify. So that's going to give us 6 equals 3x minus 9. And we have to move that 9 over to get x by itself. So we're going to go ahead and add 9 to both sides. And then that's going to give us 15 equals 3x. Finally, you have to divide by 3. So that gives us x equals, oh, here it's going to go on the next slide. Divide both sides by 3, simplify, so x equals 5. All right? But it doesn't tell us to find x. We got to find the values of ED, DF, and EF. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and plug x in to our values of ED and DF. So for ED, it's going to be 4x plus 6. We're going to put our 5 in for x, and ED is going to be 26. All right? Since D is directly in the middle, since it's the midpoint, that automatically means that DF also has to be 26. So go ahead, and if you plug in 5 and make sure that you get the same value for both ED and DF, because if you don't get the same value, then there's going to be something wrong because they have to be the same value. So since now we know that the two values are 26, in order to find the whole value, we just need to add the two segments together using segment addition postulate, and therefore our value of EF is going to be 52. Okay, so now we're going to continue with that midpoint, and we're going to go into midpoint and finding the distance. Okay, so when we're talking about midpoint, we're going to go ahead and say talk about coordinates. So we're going to be talking about the x and y. So a coordinate plane is a plane that is divided into 4 regions by a horizontal line. X-axis, which is the x-axis, and a vertical line, which is the y-axis. Okay, the location or coordinates of a point are given by an ordered pair, which is going to be x and y. Okay, so that first value in the ordered pair is always going to be your x value. The second one, your second value, is always going to end up being your y value. So the x, again, is on the horizontal line. The y is on the vertical line. With the coordinate plane, then we could talk about midpoint. You don't have to worry about writing this part down. So you can find the midpoint of a section by using the coordinates of its endpoints. And you're calculating the average of the x coordinates and the average of the y coordinates. So what does that actually look like? And that's going to look like right here. Okay, so here's the midpoint formula, and you really need to have this down right here. Okay, so the midpoint of M of AB with the endpoints of A, which is x1, y1, and then there's B, x2, y2, and that's found right here in this formula. So that's meaning the midpoint is going to equal x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So with the 1 and the 2 of the x's and y's, what's that standing for is you're going to be given two different coordinates, and you're going to add your two x values together, divide that by 2, and then you're going to add your two y values and divide that by 2. So we'll see an example like that in a moment. But just make sure you have this formula written down. So hopefully you already have that written down. Do not worry about this graph because it looks like a lot, but you'll be able to understand when you see an example. So let's go ahead and look at an example. Okay, so this says find the coordinates of the midpoint of PQ with the endpoints of P. So P is negative 8, 3, and Q is negative 2, 7. All right, the first thing that we just need to recognize is these are going to be our two coordinate values. So we're going to have to figure out our x's, and we're going to have to figure out our y's. So remember, the x's are our horizontal axis, and that's going to be the first number, and our y's is the vertical line, and that's going to be our second number of the pairs, okay? So if you were to graph it, that's what it's going to look like right there, okay? And that's where our 2 points are of P and Q, all right? Now we're going to be using this midpoint formula, which we were given on the last slide, okay? We're going to plug in our values, okay? So it's going to look something like this. So our P1, which is negative 8, is going to be added to our, so our X1 is the P1, and then our X2, which is going to be our Q1, okay? So that's going to be negative 8 plus negative 2, and that's divided by 2. And then our y values are 3 and 7, so we're going to do 3 plus 7, and that's going to be divided by 2. So that gives us negative 10 divided over 2 and positive 10 over 2. You're going to go ahead and divide them. Even if it gives you a fraction, you're going to put your answers as decimals. Okay, so in this case, we're going to put our answers as decimals. Okay, so negative 10 divided by 2 is going to be negative 5. 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5, and therefore our midpoint is negative 5, 5. All right, now let's go ahead and look at this one. Okay, when you find the coordinates of the midpoint of EF with the endpoints of E, negative 2, 3, and F, 5, negative 3. Okay, that's what it looks like on a graph. Okay, we got to use that midpoint formula as shown right here. And now we can go ahead and plug in our values. Our two x values are going to be negative 2 and 5. If you put 5 first or negative 2 first, you should get the same answer because you're just adding the two numbers. So as long as you're adding your x's together, you're good. As long as you're adding your y's together, then you're good. Okay, so for our x values, we have negative 2 and 5. And then our y values, we have 3 and negative 3. So it's going to look something just like this. All right. And then in this one, okay, we have negative 2 plus 5 divided by 2. We have 3 plus negative 3 divided by 2. So that gives us 3 over 2 and 0. So you feel free, you can leave your answer as a fraction, but I think it might be easier if you put it as a decimal, and it will be easier to enter into Delta Math as a decimal. But you can leave your answer as a fraction, but again, it makes it easier in Delta Math if you put it in as a decimal. So this would be 1.5. You could just do 3 divided by 2. So what if the case is, as on this next problem, what if we're given the midpoint, but we don't have our coordinates, we don't have all our coordinates. Okay, so we're finding one of our endpoints. So in this example, so this says M is the midpoint of x, y. X has the coordinates of 2, 7, and M has the coordinates of 6, 1. We want to find the coordinates of y. Okay, so this time we're not finding the midpoint, we're given the midpoint, but we need to find one of the endpoints. So in this case, we're going to use the midpoint formula still, but we're finding different values. So when we're finding that midpoint formula, it's M equals the whole formula. Well, this time we have M, so we're going to put 6, 1 equals, and then we're going to plug in our values of our x coordinates. So this is our x1, 2 is our x1, 7 is our x2. So that leaves us with 2 plus x divided by 2, and then 7 plus y divided by 2. All right, and then we have to go ahead and simplify. Okay, so remember, when we're finding the coordinates, that first part is your x, the second part is your y. So we're going to let the coordinates of y equal x and y. Okay, so let's go ahead. We got to find the x coordinate. So the first thing we have to do is we have to set the coordinates equal. So since 6 is our x coordinate of the midpoint, we're going to put 6 equals 2x plus, 2 plus x divided by 2. All right. In order to solve, we can't just divide our 2's, okay, because this is 2 plus x. So what we have to do first in order to get x by itself eventually is the first thing that we have to do is multiply both sides by 2. So when we multiply both sides by 2, we're going to multiply this side by 2 and this side by 2. So that's going to give us 12 equals, just like that, yep, 12 equals 2 plus x. Because when you multiply the right side by 2, your 2's are going to cancel out. So these 2's just cancel out right here. And that just leaves us with whatever's left up here. So that's 2 plus x. You simplify from there, you subtract 2, and that's going to give us 10. So x equals 10. All right, then let's go ahead and look at our y. So since our y value of the midpoint is 1, it's going to be 1 equals 7 plus y divided by 2. Okay, again, we got to multiply 2 on both sides. Okay, so when we do that, we get 2 times 1, and then we get our 2's cancel out on the right side. So that leaves us with 7 plus y. Okay, so if 2 equals 7 plus y, we got to subtract 7 to get y by itself. So therefore, our y is going to equal negative 5. Therefore, the coordinates of y are 10, negative 5. Okay. All right, we're going to do just one more example of both of those, so that way it gives you guys plenty of time to work on it in class. So we're just going to go ahead and just do number 1 and 4. Okay, so if you feel like you want to kind of try it on your own, go ahead and just try to go ahead and do it while I'm talking, and then you can compare your answers. You'll be able to look at this video in the future if you need to. But also don't forget, on Delta Math, you can click the show examples or the watch help videos to help you solve. So let's go ahead and look at this first one. The first one says, find the midpoint of the segment with the following endpoints. Okay, so we are given -6, 0, and 0, -4. Okay, so let's just go ahead and write out our midpoint formula. So this can be our midpoint equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Then our y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And again, we're just finding those coordinates of the midpoint. So up here, I'm just going to go ahead and label. Okay, this is going to be my x1. This is going to be my y1. And then 0 right here is going to be my x2, and -4 is going to be my y2. Okay, no, it's not the best looking y, but that way I know where I can fill it into our equation right here. So our m is going to continue to equal, okay, so our x1 is going to be -6. We're going to add that to our x2 right here, so that's going to be 0 divided by 2. Our y1 is 0 also, and then our y2 is going to be -4. So it's going to be plus -4. We're going to put it in parentheses so I can distinguish the plus and the negative. All right, it gives us that right there. So now let's go ahead and look at the midpoint. So right here we have -6 plus 0. Okay, what's -6 plus 0? All right, you should get -6. Okay, anything plus 0 is going to be itself. So we have -6 divided by 2. All right, and then on the other side, okay, we have 0 again. So 0 plus -4. Okay, that's going to be -4 over 2. All right, and we just got to simplify one last time. So you do -6 divided by 2 right here. Okay, and that's going to be -3. And then our y value is -4 divided by divided by 2, and that is going to be -2. So our coordinates for the midpoint are going to be -3, -2. Okay, let's go ahead and look at number 4 over here. So number 4 over here, this time we're given the midpoint. So we're given the midpoint of AB, and that's 5, -4. And the coordinates of A are 2, -6. We need to find the coordinates of B. So I'm going to go ahead and write the equation out. So again, I have M equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Right? So my midpoint value is going to be 5, -4. And then we can go ahead and plug in our value of A. So A, we'll say, is our x1 and y1. So our x1 is going to be 2, so it's going to be 2 plus x over 2. And then our y1 is -6, so we can put -6 plus y over 2. And let's go ahead and solve. So we'll go ahead and solve for x first. Okay, our x of the midpoint is 5. So we're going to have 5 equals 2 plus x over 2. Okay, we got to get x by itself, so we got to multiply both sides by 2. Right? 5 times 2 is 10. And then these 2's cancel out. So we can cross them out, and that just leaves us with 2 plus x. We're going to go ahead and subtract our 2, and our x is going to equal 8. Now we can go ahead and do our y. So our y is -4 right here. So I'm going to have -4 equals -6 plus y over 2. We got to multiply both sides by 2 first, so I didn't give myself much room, but times 2 times 2. 2 times -4 is going to be -8, and that's going to equal, these 2's are going to cancel out, so it's going to equal -6 plus y. Let's go ahead and add our 6 over. -8 plus 6 is -2, and that's going to equal y. So our coordinates for B are 8, -2. All right. Go ahead again. You have the watch help video if you need that, or you click show examples to help you out as well. And your homework will be due tonight at midnight.